And this is one of the programs in the Diversity Lecture and Film Series that our district is having this year to move forward the equity work in our district, and to show the different faces of how we talk about equity, how we talk about race, how we talk about all of the different ways that children and adults show up in our district. And this particular event is a panel discussion, and it's a panel discussion. There are principals here today to talk about how the equity work is moving forward in their buildings, what it looks like, the challenges that they're facing, the wonderful experiences that they're having with their staff and with the children and families in their school community. I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves, and if panelists, when you would introduce yourself, if you would say what school configuration you're in, whether it's K-8, K-5, high school, middle school, that kind of thing. And we'll start on the far end with Pam.
Okay. I'm Pam Wilson. I'm principal at Capitol Hill Elementary School, which is a K-5 located in southwest Portland in the Wilson High School cluster.
I am Makari Trainum, and I'm the principal at Metropolitan Learning Center, otherwise known as MLC. We are the only K-12 alternative school. We're the only K-12, but we happen to be alternative as well, that's in Portland Public. We're alternative, not necessarily because of the students we serve, but because we focus on character development, project-based, and proficiency, as well as portfolios. And I am located in Northwest Portland, but we do not have a neighborhood. We service all of Portland Public.
My name is Fred Locke. I'm interim principal at Da Vinci Arts Middle School, which is grades 6, 7, and 8, located just Burnside and 26th. We're an arts-focused school, so we draw upon the entire district. We have students from all over, and focus is art, but also a very rigorous academic program.
Hello, my name is Lisa McCall. I am the principal of Irvington. We are a community school, neighborhood school in Northeast Portland, and we are a K-8 school, and we are in the Grant cluster.
I'm Sharon Allen. I'm principal at Kelly Elementary, which is a K-5 in Southeast Portland. I'm very proud to be principal there. We have almost 600 students. We have the only Russian immersion program in Portland, and one of the very few in the nation, actually. We have a very diverse student body, and we have a high level of free and reduced lunch, but we also enjoy the fact that we're between 2 light rail stations, and we're in the process of doing an extensive interviewing process in our community to find out what our community would like us to do as a school.
Good afternoon. The days kind of run together. I am Tamala Newsome, and I'm the principal at Rosa Parks, the district's newest school. And hopefully that won't be the case much longer, because we look forward to other new schools coming online in the near future. But right now we have the distinct honor of being the district's newest school, and we are pre-K 5 serving the New Columbia and the broader parts of the Portsmouth neighborhood as well. I'm happy to be here this afternoon.
Thank you very much. My name is Cynthia McLeod, and I have this gigantic title, but don't let the title scare you. I am the Assistant Director of Equity Professional Development for Administrators. And so what that means is I'm half-time. My job is to work with principals to help them implement the equity work in their buildings. And our principals are at a variety of levels, and as you listen to our panelists today, you'll begin to pick up on some of that. We're at a variety of entry levels to this work. And so because of that, in order to make it effective in all of the buildings, it's important to have what we refer to as differentiated support. And that simply means you give me what I need when I need that in order for me to move forward. And so that's my work. I work with principals in that area, both as a consultant, as an ex-principal myself. I was a principal at Irvington for 9 years, and I retired almost a year ago in June. But this work was so fascinating to me, and my participating in it as a building principal had been such a challenging and rewarding part of my work that I was very excited when the district offered me the opportunity to come back and support fellow principals as they begin to implement Courageous Conversations, which is the name for the work that we're doing, at the building level. Now, the name Courageous Conversations means this. It means a set of protocols that we as administrators have all been trained in using that helps us have a conversation that focuses on race and the impact of race on the achievement gap, thus on all of the children in our building. And I must say, one of the things that for me as a person of color that made this work interesting was that for the first time, we were going to have a conversation, that focused on race, which, as you well know, in our country is a very challenging thing because we don't talk about race. We talk about poverty, we talk about gender, we talk about a variety of other things. But it's very difficult for us to have a conversation where we specifically talk about race. And when we speak about race, we're talking about skin color. So we, as a part of our training and a part of the protocols that we use to have this conversation, we have a working definition of race, and that working definition is skin color. And so it's how a person shows up, how a child, how a family, how a parent shows up, how a staff member shows up when other people see them, what you look like. And one of the other important things for me as a person of color in this conversation was that word conversation, and I was intrigued by that, because I've been involved in, as many of my school colleagues, both school colleagues of color as well as white colleagues, have been involved in some types of diversity training, sensitivity training, those kinds of things. And my past experience had always been that someone who looked somewhat like me, some color on the spectrum, talked to white people about race. And we talked about it in terms of, this is what it feels like to be someone who looks like me, who shows up like me. And then here's what it feels like, and here's what I need you, or I'd like you to do, or be, or think about that. But this is different. This courageous conversation is different because it is truly a conversation. It's not only about the impact that race has for me as a person of color, but it's also about the impact that race has for a person that is white. And that we all bring to this thing in the United States of America that causes us so much difficulty, experiences. And so in Courageous Conversations, we have a set of protocols that allow us, support us, to have deep conversations about what it's like for me as a person of color, but also what it is like to be a white person in the United States and what that means and what goes with that and what happens for you because of that. So I was interested in that because that was not the way we had had the conversation in the past. And because of that, I thought, I'd give this a try. And as I worked with my staff over the last couple of years, I realized that if we are going to make progress, any progress towards closing this thing that we call the achievement gap, that's the whole idea that the children of color in our district, black children, brown children, Asian children, Native American children, all of the children that are not white in our district struggle in one way or another at one time or another. And if we're going to change the disparity between those children and white children, we got to talk about race. Because here's the thing. This is another aha that I had. We have talked about, and I have sat through many a training around poverty. I've sat through trainings around the differences between boys and girls and how boys need a particular kind of schooling and girls need another kind of schooling and need different experiences. I've sat through trainings around how do you get parents involved in school and how do you keep them engaged in what's happening with their children. I've sat through all kinds of trainings around attendance and how do you get kids to come. I've sat through all of those, as many of my colleagues and as many of you as parents have heard us talk about as school people. And yet, we come back to the same place. We keep having those discussions, but we keep ending up in the same spot. We've spent hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars on curriculum. and finding the correct curriculum. Teachers sit through hours of professional development around teaching strategies. And yet we keep coming back to the same spot. Well, I think we may have finally found the missing piece, the one thing we have not talked about. We have not talked about race and the impact that race has on all of those other things. Because it's not that we're saying that race is the only important thing and that poverty doesn't have anything to do with it or parent involvement doesn't have anything to do with it. Or, it's not that, that's not the gist of it. The question is, what does race have to do with each one of those things? So that's the common denominator in all of the other areas that we've looked at over the many years. We've been talking about achievement and achievement gaps and underachievement and overachievement and not achieving and all of those things. The one common factor in all of those that we have yet to talk about until now in PPS is the impact that race has. So we're talking about it. And we're talking about it both on the teaching and learning side of it, teachers and professional development and teaching strategies and materials and all that. But we're also in our district talking about it on the operational side. That's facilities and budgets and payrolls and all of those other services that are a part of providing quality education for students. But today, our panelists are going to talk about what's going on in their schools and how they've gotten started with the work, where they are in it, what strategies they're using, what systems they've set up in their buildings to allow for this work to have space to move forward. And with that, I have a few guiding questions that I emailed to all of them so that they, I don't like catching anybody by surprise. So there wouldn't be any surprises, and so they could really give some serious thinking about what they believed would be important for you to know about the work that's happening in their buildings. But I've also told them that if there are things that these questions don't bring out, that they're absolutely free to put anything else into the room that they are willing to put in about what's happening in their buildings and what successes they're having, what challenges they may be facing, what they see as next steps as they move the work forward in their buildings. Okay, so that's where we are. And so panelists, and see, these are all my friends, so I called in a few friendships, I'll tell you. Please help me. So, it never hurts. I mean, I believe all's fair, I help them, they help me. It all works out well. And we can go in anybody that feels moved to start can start. This first question has to do with how is the work of the equity team organized in their buildings? Because one of the parts of this work is for every principal to pull together to create an equity team to help with the planning of professional development. So let's start with that. How did you go about getting your equity team, and how are they organized in your building? And then what impact is that team having on the work in your building? Sure, Ms. Newsom.
Okay. Actually, we have been, I think it's been a little over a year now. We were a Strand 2 school, or we are a Strand 2 school, and so when came time in the training that we needed to put our equity teams together, at that time we had an assistant principal, and so she and I sat down and we really thought about who needed to lead this work in our building. We gave it a lot of consideration, and I talked to different colleagues, and people had used different strategies. Some people had volunteers. Some people had teachers maybe write why they want to be a member. But for us, I thought it was important, like if everybody agrees sometime, our belief was that it's just like, oh, that's their idea. So we wanted to be balanced, and you can't be balanced unless you have both sides represented. So for us, we really wanted, it was very important to get people from throughout the building, different grade levels. We don't have a lot of men in our building, but we thought we'd snatch the one we had. And we also wanted to represent different departments such as SPED, ESL, upper grade, lower grade, the nationalities, ethnic groups that we had. And And it was very interesting because as we approached people, some of the comments and feedback that we actually got was, well, I don't really know, if I really believe in this, and I've read Courageous Conversations or parts of it, and I'm not saying I agree with all of it. I said, good, because we need your thinking. If we had everybody that agreed the same, then how do you begin to impact on those people who don't see the need for the work? And so we knew that it would take a group of us with varying perspectives, multiple perspectives, to be able to have an impact and really be able to move throughout the building. And so it started like that. And there was some reluctance on a couple of staff's part, but they came on board. And the journey that we've had together has been incredible because we all started kind of separate and, going to the trainings, it was like we were just there. And now when we come in, it's just a whole different feeling. We have rolled out the work in our building starting in August when we came back. And there was a lot of nervousness among the team. It's like, who's going to do this? And some people were very excited and anxious to want to get up, and others were like, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready yet. And so we're on the continuum in growth in our equity work and beliefs. And I think that's important. You don't want everybody there, because I could be gung-ho, but if I'm talking to somebody who's just starting on the journey, they may not hear it from me. But if they talk to somebody closer to where they were, they may be able to hear that message and be able to ask the questions and feel more comfortable. And that's kind of what we've seen. So we are well into the equity work, and it has been an exciting journey. What we found as an equity team is that we need more time. And so we have begun to explore, how do we get more time for us to deepen our level of understanding, but also to be able to grow individually as we move this work through the building. So a lot of conversations now happen around what we're doing, conversations we're having with colleagues, where we are in our own place of the work, what place are we? And I look just forward to the continued journey. We've added actually 2 new team members this year, and we look forward as other people are just really gaining the interest and understanding. So it's been a good journey, and we are excited about continuing the work.
Thank you. Thank you, Tam.
Actually, so Sharon Allen from Kelly, and we're a Strand 1 school, and I think one of the things that the district did that was very wise was to roll this out in a differentiated way, for all the schools. And so our school is just starting this year with our equity team. But the neat thing was, in our rounds of hiring last year, I inherited some teachers. We had 5 different retirements in the building. So I had a teacher from Tamla's building and some from other buildings that were farther ahead than we were, being a Strand 1 school. And I think that's great because as a principal, then it allows me to really draw on the expertise for our equity team. And there are a number of people that came to Kelly that were had worked in other buildings that could really deepen the conversations on our equity team. And one of the things in our Strand 1 that we do is we meet monthly, and then we plan the late starts, which are for the entire staff, for all the EAs, and it's one time when we can all come together. But in our first year, we were very ambitious, and we were going to have everyone write racial autobiographies and had kind of a timeline about things. And then we realized that we needed to build a base of valuing each other. It's kind of easy sometimes when you go to work every day and you think, well, I get along with everybody. But sometimes that just means I tolerate people. And if we are going to get to a place where we're really communicating our, deep love and understanding for our students by adopting these equity, the ideas and practices as something that we do all the time, we have to value each other and express things that way. So we have stepped back, and now a lot of the activities that we're doing are about that very thing, to come together as a staff. So, but anyway, thanks for your staff member.
So at Irvington, we are a Strand 3 school, and we've been doing this work for 3 years. Our equity team is 8 of us. We have acquired 3 new equity team members this year. And when we developed the team, actually Cynthia McLeod was the principal, and one of the things I think was very wise on her part is that she let the staff know that this is the work that we're going to be doing at our school with our staff. And she said, if you do not want to be a part of the equity team, send me an email and let me know. But if you do want to be a part of this team, also let me know. And then Cynthia and I, we both separately was looking at our staff and saying, who are the teachers, who are the staff that are effective with all students, but particularly also effective with students of color. And so I wrote down who I thought was strong in classroom management, building relationships with students, very effective, academic results. And Cynthia wrote down her list, and we compared the two. And it was interesting that we had almost just identical, the same names on our list. And so we had conversations with those teachers as well, and we developed a team of just 6. And it has been great because our equity team, really our goal is to not only to develop our own professional development around equity, but also to facilitate, to lead, to coach. And so it has really been a great experience in working with these staff. And so when I'm at that meeting, I'm not the principal. I am part of the equity team. And then being part of that equity team, we are charged with creating lessons, talking to colleagues, facilitating small groups of staff, building that trust. One of the things I really admire about the teachers that are on that team is that they check in with their colleagues. How's it going? If they see something happen, they're having individual conversations. This work is personal. It's not only professional. And so we check in with each other. What's coming up for you personal? Some of these, we were having conversations outside of the schoolhouse. And so it's really been a great experience. The other thing I have to say is that with this work, not only with our equity team, is that we're working on pushing into the conversation, not shoving. It is when your beliefs or your experiences are different, being willing to listen to another person's perspective, to gain understanding, to deepen the conversation. That has been very valuable, and really owning the protocols that we use with all of our meetings in our school. So and this year we are doing care work, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay, so at Da Vinci, I was hired in the beginning of August, and so I inherited an equity team, and some of them I knew personally because my daughter had been through the school. Some of them I didn't know. I asked if they could come in. I just called them up and said, hey, could we meet for a morning so that I could get a sense of what is the work that you've done, where are you, and we can just get a sense of how we're going to move forward. I had our school improvement plan, which detailed some of what they had talked about the year prior, but I also wanted to I wanted to understand that, and then I also wanted to dialogue, is this where we think we want to go or not? We have 8 members on our team, myself, our vice principal, 3 core teachers, which is language arts, social studies, and writing, a counselor, and our community liaison, who actually founded Da Vinci 16 years ago. So a broad team. The counselor was brand new, and Connie Chaffetz, the community liaison, was also new. What I heard from them full stop in the meeting was, we're very excited about this work. We've been talking about it for 2 years. We're a Strand 2 school. We want to implement. That was exciting to me because I was essentially in the same place. And so the question was, how do we push this work forward? How do we do it in a way that feels comfortable for us, but we also decide that and model the urgency with which the work needs to be addressed. We made some critical decisions in terms of our monthly professional development, and late opening would be our equity work because it provided the longest amount of time. And then we do a planning meeting, and then generally another planning meeting prior to our actual work so that we can fine tune. What's been strong is our sense of gradually the sharing and telling our own stories and becoming comfortable with each other has grown. Yesterday we met for 2 hours. We viewed the house we live in, which we're going to show to staff tomorrow, which is just an extremely powerful documentary. And then we talked about it, and then we talked about a particular issue which had come up over the weekend. And our ability to raise questions and not necessarily having answers, but understanding as a community, it's very important that we address an issue. A parent was very concerned with a performance that happened over the weekend, and we discussed that, and we realized this is a great teachable moment because our school as a whole community needs to understand this and realize how do we move through this in an intentional manner. And there's much more to our story, but I'll stop there and just know that the work is deeply personal for all of us, and the fact that we're doing it together is, and as Lisa said, it's very much about, it's a team. We're a team. We lead the work together, and that allows us each to give our strengths and also time to reflect.
So, Makari at MLC, my story is similar to Fred in the sense that when I came to MLC, the team was already put together. And so we are a Strand 2 school, and they were ready to move to staff. And initially, I was all gung-ho and like, yes, let's do it. And then after council with Cynthia, as we talked through a few things about what's going on and what's happening, it allowed for me to realize that because I was new to the school, because I did bring in a different perspective because I was a person of color, that we needed more time to do some work together as a team. And so because of that, I went to the team and we pulled back. And we collectively agreed to wait to move to staff until we were able to be vulnerable with one another, to really be willing to talk about our deep-rooted beliefs and feelings and values when it comes to talking about race. And so we just ended up pulling back. So we did not start presenting to our staff until last month. February was the first time that we presented to staff, and we did that purposefully because we wanted to make sure that we understood that being an E-team, an equity team, doesn't mean that we know all things race and equity. It simply means that we're the most practiced in the protocol that we are trying to teach to our staff about how to talk about race. So what we ended up doing, it has been taking the time to really get to know each other, to be willing to be vulnerable and saying kind of what's on our mind and what's coming up. Talking about what Speak Your Truth is, that speaking your truth is not simply what we are saying, but it's also what we're not saying. So if we're choosing to not put what our thoughts are into the space, how does that affect us really being able to work through the protocols and challenge and discuss some of the beliefs and values that we hold. So the other part, more recently today, my team is actually meeting without me, but one of the things that they're doing is they're looking at an article that's actually in Portland Monthly called By the Grace of God, and it's an article that's talking about gentrification in the Albina area. And one of the things that the questions that I left for them to be thinking about is if you're in agreement about what's being said, as you read through this and you feel like this was injustice and this wasn't right, and yes, I think that this is wrong, what does that really mean? So it's okay to say that it's wrong, but what does that mean about what we've been doing to either perpetuate systematic racism? What does it mean? What have we been doing to interrupt what systematic racism is? So I wanted them to just start thinking about that even when we nod our head in agreement, we can be agreeing, but what are our actions, whether conscious or unconscious, doing to perpetuate racism? And so those are kind of some of the things that we are collectively trying to do as an E-team, so that when we are coming to staff and we're having hard conversations, if we've been able to kind of go through some of the ugliness, and we've been able to be mindful about how we ask questions to probe more amongst ourselves as a team, then we should feel really confident about doing that with our staff as well. And so that's pretty much how the work is moving for us right now. Sure.
Okay. Pam Wilson from Capitol Hill K-5 Elementary School. We have about 379 students at our school. We're not a large school, but we've had a lot of, this is my 6th year as principal there, and we've had a lot of teams at our building, teacher teams, and I have a really strong staff, and there's a number of teacher leaders on the staff. So the principal started this work, I don't know, was it 6 years ago maybe, Cynthia, or with Glenn Singleton? I'm Vicki.
About 5 years ago. About 5 years ago.
Maybe 5 years ago, but we had a different superintendent when this all started. And so I remember those first few meetings, and now I always tell my staff, well, principals are slow learners, so it takes us a lot longer to learn how to do this work. And I got very anxious personally to get it started in my building as we undertook the learnings that we did as administrators. But now it's interesting, once we have our team going, there's so much to do, and there's so many important things to do that I think it's going to be very interesting to see how we work through all of this. Right now we have a team at our building that I chose using a tool that was provided for us. Was it from PEG that we got that? About how to select your E-team members, and that tool was a series of questions looking at your staff that I filled out initially. So I didn't put an all call out for volunteers. I used this tool, and then I personally asked the individuals that rated the highest on this tool if they would be willing to join our team. And fortunately, everyone I talked to was very interested and wanted to do it. And it uses criteria such as your staff of color. Well, at Capitol Hill, we have very few staff of color. And at the time that we started with our first team, we had 2 staff, one who's Vietnamese and one who's African American. And they both joined the team very willingly. And then, as with many schools, when summer came along and changes happened in staffing, one of those people left and went to a different building, and he was our only male on the team. And then one of our other team members, not a woman of color, decided that she was going to have a baby, and so then she left. And it was interesting because it left our existing team feeling very in the lurch, and it was interesting to watch the what are we going to do now kind of response that we had. So at that point, I just put out an all call for anyone interested who would like to be part of the team, and it was wonderful because I have one teacher who is in a biracial marriage who stepped right up, and I did not expect her to, for a lot of different reasons. And then another one of our teachers who's very, very new, but she's been going through similar training in her educational program. And so she had some of this exposure to some of what we're doing, which is really exciting because she's come on board, and it's been great having her there with a little bit more background. So right now we have a team that's all together, and we just started working together. So we're going to be doing something that's going to be interesting, a little bit different from yours, Makari. We're going to be training and bonding as a team as we're moving this work with staff, which maybe in retrospect we'll decide was not a good idea. I don't know. But right now it seems to be okay. And we are doing our training with our staff on our late openings, so all of our staff are there. Their secretaries are there. all of our pairs are there, all of our EAs are there, and everyone's nodding. And it couldn't be better, I think. With respects, if we're really going to do this work, it cannot be segmented into certain groups of people. And they are thrilled to be a part of it, which is really exciting. So one frustration is, because of budgetary limitations, we have not been able to bring our equity teams together as a team for training with our PEG leaders or whoever in the district is doing the training at that time. And that is unless we can pay for it out of our own building budget. So we can bring in 2 of our teacher leaders and of course the administrator, and we'll get sub coverage. Sometimes I'll give up my sub coverage so we can bring a 3rd team member in. But that's been a real concern for how to be unified as a team yet not be together when we're doing training. So the last training we went to, I just forked over the money and we brought everybody together, which was really, really worth it. But it's difficult in a small school because there isn't a lot of extra money. We don't have Title I funds. I mean, it's difficult for everybody. So that will be a challenge that I still will have to look forward to, I'm sure, for next year. We started, though, with our first rollout to the staff, and let me tell you, I was scared to death because I had no idea how this was going to work. And yet I was hearing other people talking about it, this is what they did, and I kind of gathered some tidbits and helpful information from other principals about here's what I did my first team, and here's how we rolled it out initially. So I felt like, okay, we kind of have a game plan. But when I met with my team in my building, they put together the game plan, which was much better, and decided right out of the gate that we really did need to teach staff and talk to other staff about what is institutionalized racism. Being primarily a white staff, I think most of our work right now is going to really be around that culture of whiteness, the perspective of whiteness. I think white privilege is going to be a huge piece of work that we're going to need to do in our building. So we decided to start with The House Divided, which is, I don't know, is from this videotape called Race, the Power of an Illusion. It was a PBS series. Quite good and very compelling and very, I think, upsetting in some ways. And the house that we lived in was the first video we decided to show. We did some introductory talk about what we're here for, why we're doing this. And I just keep hitting with my staff across the nation, in our district, in our state. You can predict student achievement outcomes by skin color. And when our teachers hear that, it's pretty, I think, shocking for some of them, but also really unacceptable for all of them. To just boil it down to, that's what the data shows. And is that what we want? Is that what we want to perpetuate? And so it felt like we kind of got down to a point where people got it right away. No, that's not okay. Nobody on staff thinks that's a good thing. Not that they don't have the reasons and the excuses and the yes buts that go along with that. But anyway, we showed a house we live in, and remember these late openings. They start at our school. They start at 8 o'clock, and we have to get the teachers back in the classrooms by 9:45. And we finished around 9:30, but people left after viewing this. There was a lot of conversation. We did an activity, and then they debriefed. We had a share out, and we had exit slips that we had them fill out, talking about their thoughts about the work we're embarking on as they left that first session. And the feedback I got right away was people were disturbed. They were thinking about Portland as we looked at how in the video it really talks about how cities are segregated according to how financial institutions will loan people money, how housing markets and real estate firms create those barriers for people of color to buy, and how a home, well, at least until just recently, used to be your middle class, really your source of wealth. and how we were denying people of color access to that. That really hit home with our staff, and they left the meeting shook up. And they were talking of the same things like I heard them say, gosh, if we hadn't done this in Portland, if we hadn't created the red line, think how different our schools would be. And I thought that was such a great thinking for them to come up with. So the feedback I got was, oh, can't we do these meetings at another time so we're not walking out of the meeting and feeling upset and disturbed and we have to go teach our kids. So we're having our next session tomorrow, and one of the things we're going to spend a little bit of time with is talking about one of the 4 agreements, which is accepting and expecting non-closure. And no, we're not going to do it at another time. We're not going to make it easier. We're going to include all of our staff. I can't pay them to stay after school. We're going to do it at the late opening, and I think it's going to be a real life experience and what that discomfort feels like with acceptance and the acceptance of non-closure.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Well, just this much and just this one question. I'm imagining that you're seeing that we have a range of places at our schools are addressing the issues around race. We also have some wonderful enthusiasm from our administrators as well as from the teaching staff for a topic that is difficult at best. On the best day, it's a hard thing to talk about, and yet we have our staff engaging in the conversation because we know we're beginning to see that if we don't talk about race, we're not going to be able to provide the type of education for all of our students that everyone wants. Because nobody sends their child to school to get a subpar education. We all are hoping the best, and we're all sending the best children that we have. And it is our responsibility as educators to provide the very best education that we can for all children, no matter who shows up, how they show up, how often they show up. It's still our responsibility to provide a quality education for them. So let's shift gears just a little bit, and you kind of touched on this panel, but I'm going to ask you to talk a little more specifically, and Annie, you can just jump in. You don't have to stay in order. You guys can talk in any way that you feel comfortable. So can you talk to us a little bit about the level of support and about the types of support that you've gotten at the district level for moving this work forward in your building?
I worked a lot with Cynthia as a new principal.
I didn't pay her to say that.
She didn't. But it's been great to have Cynthia as a resource to help me process exactly how to move the work through my building. And I think one of the best things that could have happened was this year I went to the Courageous Conversation Summit, and I took one of my teachers that was on my E-team with me. And it was such a life-changing experience for both of us in really deepening our understanding about how we move this work in our building, first with us. So moving the work within ourselves to understand where our own stuff kind of comes up. And so it was great for me to be there. It was great for him to be there because he really came back with this idea of, I'm going to start having some courageous conversations. And when I hear these and when I see things, I'm going to. And so it was great to have two perspectives to have gone through this process and to really be understanding the protocols that we use for having our conversations about race. And so to have him participate in that was extremely helpful. And it was very helpful in understanding, I think part of what my team was looking for was kind of this timeline and tools for having these conversations in the building. And finally coming to understand that the only tool that we need is the protocol that Courageous Conversation gives us, which is 4 agreements and 6 conditions. And if we understood that very deeply, that is the work that we're doing. And so it was having him participate in that really helped for us to shift how our team thought about what this work was and to get everyone into the process of you have to deeply commit to, understand, and utilize the framework around courageous conversations in order to engage in conversations about race. So outside of Cynthia, yay Cynthia, I would say definitely participating in the summit. And then our trainings that we have throughout the year around deepening our knowledge and understanding with the conversation or with the protocols and the framework.
So I had something to offer. So Cynthia probably doesn't remember this, but she came over to my table at one of the equity meetings and asked me about how things were going with my staff, and I started to cry. And, it's one of those moments where you're like, really? What am I doing? And she was kind of like patting me on the back, and I said, oh, I'm overtired. But really, I think what it was about was I was thinking about leadership. I was thinking about how I think the thing the district has given me is a better eye, a better judgment for who's going to be a leader about this. And as I look across this room, there are a lot of people I know from many different departments in Portland Public. And I think that what Cynthia's done this year is a call to action. It's not like overt, like, I don't know, Occupy or something, but it's subtle, and it's saying you got to step up. And I think there's people all over that look at education and say, what is taking you so long about this issue? I think that when you deal with people and you're trying to foster leadership in your building, like what we talked about with some of our teachers that are very good at this, work in trying to delve with staff members and trying to get them to talk about things that will ultimately lead us to a valuing society, that, you have to develop an eye for that. But you also have to develop a realization that people will come to this, but they're maybe going to be at different places and different times. And I always think of Kosi Johnson, who was the longest surviving AIDS patient in South Africa for a very long time. But when he was 13 years old, he said, do what you can with what you have in the time you have in the place you are. And I think that that kind of attitude, that we are all moving forward, because you can't be in education and not be doing this work today at all. But that you're going to be at different levels of expertise, of different levels of being able to motivate others, and especially our neighborhood communities. That's where I see, at least at Kelly, is going to rapidly and ultimately be where we're going to make the biggest difference. So anyway, that's it.
I'll go next. One of the supports for me in doing this work around courageous conversation, it has definitely been the support of my colleague. And again, along the theme of Cynthia again, when I first came to Irvington, to Portland, 4 years ago, before we had started doing the work at the district around courageous conversation, Cynthia, of course, hired me as her assistant principal, or recommended me for the position. And so I went into her office, and I think it was very early on, and she had a book in her office, and the title of that book was Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton. And I looked at it, and I just said, are you ready to do this? Are you ready to have these conversations with staff? And she says, I've been ready. Okay. And, just hearing that gave me all the support I need. There were no protocols at that time. There was this tool, this wonderful tool, the book. So we actually started with our staff with the books, using it as a book study. And then a year halfway into the book, our district provided support in the form of seminars for Strand 3, and there are 6 of them over the course of 2 years, where you as administrators would take your equity team and attend the day-long seminars to really learn about the protocols and how to have the conversation and how to deepen the conversation with individuals, with your staff, with your families. And so that's how we got started. It was a big support. And I tell you, one of the things that going through the seminars I've learned is that the tools really didn't cost anything. And those tools are the protocols. That is, the 4 agreements, stay engaged, speak your truth, experience discomfort, and accept and expect non-closure. And then the 6 conditions is how you have a conversation. And really being true to following those with fidelity at every opportunity, at every meeting, has really helped us as a staff move this work forward in our building. And if I were to tell anyone, if you were to ask me, well, what do you need? You need to have passion, and you need to have the will to want to do this work. It is so critical. Our students that we have been entrusted with educating, who as parents, you give us your very best, and they can't afford for us to wait, and the urgency is now. And so, yes, that support from our district has been very helpful, but the passion and the will has to come from us. And along that, as the principal of Irvington, I know that I need to go deeper in that work personally. So right now I'm reading The Faces at the Bottom of the Well by Derek Bell, and he also did a lot of work around critical race theory. So we're doing that while our staff is really working on cultural relevant practices in their classroom. So again, the support is critical, but most of all, you have to want to do this and believe that every child that comes in our buildings and comes into the classroom, that we can say that we see them and we want them to do the very best and be the very best that they can.
Anyone else want to comment on that one? Or I'll throw out another one. You want to, Ed? Fred? Go ahead.
So at Da Vinci, it was important for me in the very beginning to share the work not only with our staff and do the work with our staff, but I also wanted to offer it to our community at large, to our parents. Like Capital, we're a predominantly white school, about 80%, and I knew that this would be challenging work for all of us. And so at our first PTSA meeting, I shared our data. And when you look at our data, we're recognized by the state for the last 3 years as an outstanding school. When you look more closely at our data, you find that we actually have a glaring achievement gap. I was very nervous because I felt it was critical to share the data disaggregated as it is by race. And I used the slides that Arnie gave me, chose specific slides, and I looked at it both last year to this year and also over 5 years. And the data speaks the truth. And I wanted to start there. I wanted to start there with our staff, and I also wanted to start there with our community to say, yes, there are many aspects of Da Vinci Arts Middle School which are brilliant, and there are. But at the same time, we have a huge challenge because we are not meeting the needs of all of our students. And until we do, we are not a school that can be considered outstanding, despite the rating. So I shared the data. I was very nervous, and I asked the question, so is there anything that we can celebrate? And I didn't really have an answer. I didn't know what people would say. One of our African-American mothers stood up, and bless her soul, her response was that we are having this conversation. And that was music to my ears. And I said to her, thank you. It is critical that we have this conversation. The time for this conversation is right now. And at that point, I shared with them, I'm offering a community parent group that we will do the same work that we're doing with the staff in the evening. So tomorrow we will do our staff work in the morning, and then tomorrow from 6:30 to 8 we're meeting with a group of parents. And the work is basically identical. It's a little different, but it's been very powerful. And then what I've done is written about the work that we do every month. We have a weekly. I do a weekly article, but every month I write about equity, and I have also sent that work to Luis Versailles, who has led our Strand 2 equity work for the last 3 years. He emailed me yesterday morning at 4:52 a.m. just to give you a sense of his commitment. And we had a meeting yesterday, and we had our lesson plan for tomorrow, and then we tweaked it and rearranged it quite a bit. I emailed that to him again and said, hey, do you have any comments? And he had this one small change, but that one small change was critical. That critical race theory really belongs in condition 5, which is establishing a working definition for race, and not as examine the role and presence of whiteness, which is condition 6, which is where I'd put it. And in just a short paragraph, he explained his rationale and that reasoning. And so, and Luis has been great. I've been able to just email back and forth, and now I copy my equity team, so we're all reading what I'm sending him, and it just sort of broadens the work. The last call out that I want to do is to Kehlani and Sarah, who have been brilliant here. Little did I know that when I said, well, we're going to do our staff work, and then we're doing a community group. Well, how many books do you need? I said, maybe 60. So 2 days later, I had 60 courageous conversation books. And then I said, I really want to use Everyday Anti-Racism. There are brilliant articles in this. We'd gotten it last year, I believe, as administrators, and I'd started reading it. I said, well, can I have some copies of these? And then the video that we're showing tomorrow, articles by the grace of God, was Local Color. Those resources, particularly as a white male, I need those lenses. I need to understand the African American perspective. I need to understand the perspective of color, because it isn't part of what I grew up with. And this work has been such a blessing because it's helped me understand that to have schools that we engage every single child, we need to understand what every child is experiencing. And we can only do that through multiple racial perspectives. And so I'm just very thankful that there's so many people, both on our team and at the district, who are willing to support us. And the fact that the district is doing this, and as Glenn said to us last week, we're near the front in terms of nationally, the fact that as an urban district, we are saying this is critical, this is what we're about, and I'm very proud to be just a small part of that work.
Thank you, and why don't I just take this opportunity, because Kehlani and Paula Dennis and Jody Rutherford are all here. Would you all stand? Because they're a part of this team too. I'm standing here, but I'm not that yet. Absolutely. And Sarah, who is the logistical support for this team, is away at this time, but she is also a very important part. Because you've heard them mention seminars. Well, the seminars, and there is another component, Beyond Diversity, which is a 2-day experience. These experiences are the foundation for the work that these principals are talking about, that their equity teams are engaged in, and it takes a lot to do that. It takes a lot to put them on. We also are in partnership with Pacific Educational Group, and that's the Glenn and the Luis that you've heard them speak about, and there are several other members of that particular team. They're based in San Francisco, am I right about that? And they have provided that technical, professional content support that we so desperately needed in order to be able to begin this work in our schools. So this is a large effort. There are many people involved in it, and because it's important. And that is one of the ways that I know that our district is serious about the importance of this work, is where resources are committed. So is there anyone else that wants to, or I'll just go on to another one? Okay, they gave me the thumbs up. Okay, my next question has to do with, so, as administrators of a building, one of the things we're charged with is, of course, initiatives and moving forth initiatives in our district, but we're also charged with some accountability. So how do we know what's going on, and how do we know if it's effective or not? And one of my concerns when we began and got serious about the courageous conversations about racial work and the equity work, one of my concerns was, are we going to be rushed too quickly to, okay, so what do the numbers say? I want to see a graph. I want to see a chart. Where's the pie chart? Where's the bar graph? And I felt that, and I believed that before this work necessarily showed up as a bar graph, it would show up in the fabric of how buildings are working or not working, and who they're working for and who they're not working for. So I'd like the panel to give us some insight into, so what are the indicators? What things are you seeing that lets you know that the work that you're doing with your equity team and that the equity team is doing with your staff, what are the indicators that something is going on in your building that's a positive thing for kids and families?
I would say for Rosa Parks, there are a variety of indicators. The first one that immediately comes to mind is the way we talk about children. So in our building screening committees or our child study teams, we're not quick to jump to, well, let's get them tested, let's look at other services other than in my classroom. It really is about, are we doing everything we can in our classrooms, in our school, through the supports that we have, limited resources, though there may be. We're doing that first, and that's not coming from the administrative team, it's coming from teachers and wanting to do more. I also look at the fact that with the exception of a new teacher who was just hired in November to complete the year as a temporary teacher, every other teacher has been to the 2-day Beyond Diversity training. And that was kind of a goal that I set this year. And so when I was just asking teachers, how many have been, it was interesting because over half the staff had been last year, and I didn't even know some of them had gone, so I just thought that was awesome because they sought that out for themselves when they heard about this work. The fact that we have a team, an equity office, that we have our own trained staff that can do these trainings has been incredible. Teachers come back, they're very excited, they're talking about what they've learned, what they've heard from our own team, so we're able to get to more people because we have our own resources. We're not having to bring people in every time, and that has been you see people coming back really thinking about what all they've seen and heard, and then looking at the pieces that we're doing too. And I think everybody needs that 2-day training. It just sets kind of a beginning foundation, and then what we're doing as the equity team is building on it. One teacher came back and I was like, so what'd you think about the fact this very last training? She just kind of looked and she said, it was a hard 2 days. It was just emotionally draining, but I'm starting to get it. It's starting to make sense. And so what do we do? And that's always the next question once they kind of process. It's this do. And if you know anything about the compass, that's that action piece. Okay, there's a problem here. We have to do. And yet it's so important to be able to be in all parts of the quadrant and to be centered so that you're thinking through, your feelings and emotions are not driving you to overreact or whatever. I also see the fact that there are teachers now that are able to, and staff that are able to really begin to look through the lens of multiple perspectives when talking with parents. And that it's not, well, I don't see why this parent is not doing this. I don't see why, but they can actually say, I get that there are some things going on in this family now, and it really has an impact on this child. And realizing that it's going to take a village to be able to maybe sometime put this child back together. We have a very diverse school, very diverse and very complex in terms of the various nationalities. We have, for example, there are children that represent 10 countries on the continent of Africa alone. We have families literally from all over the world. And as we're learning about them and they're learning about us and we're learning what they need and they're learning how to tell us what they need, we have to be able to listen and process that and be able to meet the needs. And for us, our African American children, we are struggling. We are struggling. We are trying to re-engage kids. We have started a book study, and there were teachers who couldn't come on the day, and it was talking about black males and their success not only in school, their achievement in school, but in life. And so there were teachers that couldn't make it, and so they came up with, could we start a group and maybe do a blog about it, and then those of us who can't actually stay after school, we could communicate this way. I don't care how you do the work. So it's causing us to also look at ways outside the box to be able to engage our staff members on a different level. And we too include everybody. So when we meet tomorrow morning, it's all of us. And it is, it's a nice block of time, but it's so short. So one thing that we've actually done is for next year, we're saying, teachers have said we need more time. So we're looking at doing a staff meeting, and then the next day, or if we have a Monday staff meeting, then that Wednesday, we would have like part 2, so that we can get a little more time to explore the work, because that's really the critical part for us now. And I mentioned earlier, as a team, my team is wanting to meet more. So we have a half day that teachers were willing to give up some of their professional development time, and we were able to get enough subs and cover so that we could spend a half a day. And Cynthia is actually coming out and doing that with us, because we're getting down really into condition 5 and 6, and we're a little nervous about not only having 2 more late openings, and then like, do we really want to open this up and leave people hanging, or what part can we do? And we need some guidance. And I think it's also very important to know when you need to go and ask for help. So we are really, really glad that we have people in the district that we can go to that have developed their work beyond ours, and that can answer the questions and help us address those.
Thank you. Anybody else want to?
Well, one of the indicators for me and for us at Irvington is not just quantitative but also qualitative, and it shows up in stories, those conversations where we are given a counter story to dispel the myth of stereotypes, or just to say, what does race have to do with this decision, or what does race have to do with office referrals? And really seeing students building those relationships with students, and then also for students to be self-reflective. I think it was a year and a half ago, maybe we were having a conversation that typically students of color are seen as the problem, but a white student might be seen as having a problem. So what do you do with that? So if a student is the problem, you tend to want to kind of get rid of the problem. But if a student is seen as having a problem, you want to help them. And how that shows up in progress or indicators that really staff is taking to heart and having these conversations and really being self-reflective. One of my teachers, and I've shared this story before, is that as assistant principal, I saw many students, and it was very disheartening to see the disparities where our students of color were showing up in our discipline data constantly, in particular our black boys. And so I had one teacher students in my classroom, in my office. One was black and one was white. And so the black student I saw a lot. And I had only seen the white student for the first time in my office. So when I inquired from the teacher, I says, first time I'm seeing this student, so is this a new issue of this student being referred? And the teacher said, well, no, this student is probably having more difficulties than the other student. And I said, well, that's very interesting. So let's have a courageous conversation. So what does race have to do with that? Where you were referring the student of color many times, multiple times, and you are saying that this white student who you've only referred one time, you've been having issues with this student all along. So what's the difference? And so she really, because we built up this trust and we'd been having these conversations with staff, she took it to heart and said, I never really thought about it. I just saw this white kid. I saw him like my own child, and whereas maybe it's easier for me to talk to to the family and say, you know, Johnny is having a little bit of problems in the school, can you help me out? Whereas maybe I thought if I refer the student of color, then maybe he would get more help, and then you kind of send him back fixed. Well, these are really hard conversations to have, but because of the relationship and the trust, we can have these conversations. And so fast forward now, you know, with our staff, when you're writing referrals, we put a category on that you're naming race, and why are you referring these students? What interventions have been put into place? You know, how many times have you called that family? And do not turn in a referral unless you have made contact with families. And so how does that show up in our data? Yeah, we are making progress and we have less referrals, but we still have a long way to go. And we also have our professional development every month on a late opening Wednesday, and that includes all of our staff, our certified staff, our classified staff, and even our partners in our community. We have a SMART program, and the coordinator said, can I come too? Can I get trained too? And all of our staff, including our partners in our community, have attended the 2-day Beyond Diversity training. And that also includes we have several student teachers in our building, and they too have attended the training. So that's just a couple of indicators of progress and success. But the real progress is the students. And the students really knowing that we as a staff validate them, we see them, we believe in them, we want to support, we want to help them, we want to set the bar high. We want to have high expectations for all of our students, and that they can articulate that and they can say, this teacher believes in me. This teacher has been to my basketball game. This teacher believes that I can be somebody. And no, that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. So for me, it is definitely those opportunities where staff say, can you come into my classroom and do an equity observation? Can you come in and just say, am I missing somebody? Did I not call on a student because of their color, because of their race? Did I not? Did I, am I sending kids out? One of the hardest things for me, and the reason why I became an administrator, is that as a teacher, I didn't like seeing my colleagues send students out in the hallway. And what are they learning when they're out in the hallway? Nothing. And so having those conversations is like, if they're not in the classroom, they're not learning. And if we are suspending students, they're not learning. Being punitive is not the answer. 3 weeks ago, there were a couple of articles made national headlines about the disparities that exist with the expulsion rate for our students of color. Again, personal, local, and immediate is relevant for all of us. And so that's what we're talking about tomorrow. We're talking about our discipline rate. We're going to read the articles. There were one from the Oregonian, the Skinner, that made a lot of attention about how we as a nation, we're still suspending and expelling our students of color at a high rate. And when I say students of color, I don't just mean our black students. This is our Latino students. All of our students that are non-white. And so, again, that's action. We have to look at our own house. That means, what are we doing with our own students? Again, another indicator of success is that we're willing to be transparent, not judgmental, but really looking at what we can do. One of my staff saying, I just want an answer. I want it to be solved. But this problem that we have in our schools, in society, didn't happen overnight. It's not going to be fixed overnight. But what do you have control over? your actions. So if someone comes to you and say, you know, we need to do this with those black students or those Latino or Hispanic students, what are you going to say back? Are you going to have a conversation, or you're not going to say anything? Well, my staff would tell you that they are having that common language. They are talking about it. Again, another indicator of success. So it will show up, but the urgency is to continue to do the work that we're all doing.
Okay. Yes,
I just want to have a funny story in seeing it move in my building. So one of my teachers, he's on my E-team, and he's really getting into it, and so he goes to New Seasons a lot, and he likes Ebony magazine, and he goes, I like it because it doesn't say magazine, it says it's a movement, and he's like, that really touches me. He's a white man, and he's like, that really touches me. So he went to New Seasons about a couple of weeks ago. He's telling the story, and he went to New Season, and he picked up the newest edition of Ebony, and he went to the checkout line, and he said he saw how the clerk, she was a white woman, looked up at him like, what's going on? And so he said he attempted to engage her, like, she said interesting, and he goes, really, what makes it interesting? And so he was trying to use some mindful inquiry around, let's talk about, why do you feel this way? And so she didn't bite the bait or take the bait. And so he ended up buying it and going on, and he said to himself, I decided to go back in. And so he did it 2 more times and went through 2 different lines, another one with a white man and another one with a black woman. And it was funny because for him, it was kind of his pseudo kind of test run. And he said the 2 white clerks responded in the same way of just kind of feeling like, wow, why would you be buying this? Whereas the black clerk was like, right on, go, good job, glad you're doing that kind of thing. And so it was just really interesting for him. And so I think it's things like that just kind of show growth. A couple of other things is just that, again, like Tamala had said, in student support team meetings, they are asking questions around looking at race before we start talking about special ed. What have we done? What have our real interventions been? Have you seen these types of behaviors in your white students? If so, why are we referring this kid specifically to be looking at SPED services? And then the other thing that I think is just it's starting the adaptive change around noticing when kids are congregating together. So things that I think that they just didn't pay attention to before. Wow, I'm noticing that I only have 3 Asian students and they happen to all sit together when they're in class, or just things like that where they haven't, I don't believe, they said they didn't necessarily recognize it beforehand, and now those are things that stand out to them, and just kind of wanting to know why, like what's happening and what kind of environment am I creating that would be the case. And the last thing is just kind of looking at the books that we read. My school is very similar to Fred's, where we are about 85% white. We're application based, so kids apply to get into our school, and so we have maintained a really white specific type of style school, and the books that we have as well within our school do not represent multiple perspectives, and that's something that I've been asking more and more about when kids are holding up their books to talk about them, that I'm asking to teachers, how do you encourage and bring in other perspectives so that kids are choosing books outside of their normal reference or their normal frame of reference to try and to learn about other things and be exposed to it. So.
Okay, great. Let me check the time. Okay, I'd like to have the last half hour be an opportunity, 6:30, right? Am I done? Yeah. Okay, the last half hour be for audience questions. So if you're thinking about some things, get those in your mind and get ready. And I'm going to ask the panel one more question, and then we'll talk through that, and then we'll end with some questions from the audience. So now that some of you've spent 2 years with an equity team. Your equity teams are brand new, so you're in those different kind of that spectrum. If you could have just the perfect, and I'm going to kind of go out on a limb, the perfect support for next year, for furthering this work next year, if you could have just the perfect thing, what would you ask for, or what would you like to see? I'll put it that way. What would you like to see us doing as a district that would give you that perfect thing that you would need to continue to move the work forward? Now, we all know, I'm asking the Santa Claus question, but sometimes in thinking about that, we kind of can begin to figure out, so we may not have the perfect, but what can we do within that? So if you would just kind of give your What do you think? What would be your perfect? So either that, or if you've got a great story that you haven't gotten to tell, you can tell that now too. Okay, equity story, you can tell that.
I'll actually start with the story, but I think it gets at, as I look at this work forward, where do we need to go? And I'm framing it around the need to experience discomfort. Our last, which is one of the 4 agreements, our last month we worked with Beaumont Middle School and did the color line with them. And we wanted to do the color line with them because we're a predominantly white school. Beaumont has more teachers and staff of color. And we also, in doing the color line,
would you mind explaining kind
Yes.
of what the color line
Yeah.
is for?
So Peggy McIntosh is a professor at Amherst University, and in, I believe, 1980 or 1983, I think 1983, she designed, she wrote an article called White Privilege, the Invisible Knapsack. And it's a series of 26 questions, I believe, 30 questions approximately. And because of my race or color, and then the question comes. And let me think of some examples. Because of my race or color, I can go shopping and not be harassed, and that's not quite the.
I can find Band-Aids that match.
I can find Band-Aids that match the color. Because of my race or color, I can buy Band-Aids that match the color of my skin. And
I can get my hair. Because of my color, I can get my hair done wherever
Right.
I want.
Yes.
I can find
So-
hair products. Yeah.
questions that help as a white male, my answers are mostly, and so if because of your race or color, you can, it's true for you that you can buy a house in your neighborhood and not be hassled at all, or feel totally comfortable, then you would answer, this is almost always true for me, you answer 5. If it's sometimes true, you answer 3. And if it's never true, you answer 0. And what shows up is white privilege. And so that a high score means that because of white privilege, you've been able to answer, yes, this is almost always true for me. I can go shopping, I can, without hassle, I can buy a house wherever I want to. It's a powerful survey. And so what you do is you do it yourself and you answer the questions yourself. And then you ask someone of a different ethnicity, a different race, and ask them the same questions. So for me, I called up one of my parents who does our parent group, and it's someone who I have a lot of respect for. And my score was 126 out of 130. Her score was 47. And she's an African-American mother of one of the students at our school. And we talked about, after I did the survey, we spent about 15 minutes just debriefing it and unpacking it. And as I asked her these different questions, she was like, wow, that's hard. I can't go shopping. I have specific places where I get my hair cut. And just recognizing that race is always an issue and always part of her life, whereas someone with white privilege needs to understand I need to be 100% conscious of race if I'm going to do good work and serve every child. And if I'm not, if I'm unconscious, then I have some real problems and real blind spots. And so the survey brings this out. And so we did it 2 schools together because we didn't know we knew a little bit of the other staff, but it was a much larger group, and it was very powerful. And what one of my teachers said, this was so important to me, or for me, because I recognized This work is not about Da Vinci Arts Middle School. This is about Portland Public School. Every single child, as Lisa and others have said, who walk through our doors, they deserve absolutely our very best. And if we're not at 100% or over 100%, and especially around the issue of race, we're not able to serve them. And so we need to understand our whiteness, we need to understand our students and staff of color, and only through developing these racial and multiple perspectives are we able to then really produce curriculum that's engaging, that's compelling, that kids want to show up for. And when their voices come to the table, then learning gets very exciting, and those test scores go up, and that achievement gap is gonna disappear. But it's about all of us in the room.
Thank you, Fred.
So I guess are we still on the wish list question?
Either wish list or story.
So what I've seen at Kelly, and just the part that we've done in Strand 1, is that there are people that are willing and able to be leaders, in the equity work. And many of them are at different schools. And that if the district could find ways to, we do some other things like teachers on special assignment. We recognize teachers as leaders, and sometimes they go back into the classroom, but at least for a time, they're able to give their expertise to help move things along. So the willingness to have these courageous conversations that are also critical because you have to have them is something that I think people can learn to do. And I think if you're going to be an educator, you have to have a moral compass, and that should lead you to know that you have to do this. But I'd like to see the district do, have a cadre of people that are not necessarily troubleshooters, but in a way they're going to hold us accountable to higher standards. We have benchmarks in all different kinds of things. I think there are benchmarks in this work as well. And so let's say ostensibly that there was a team from like Lisa's school, if they're a Beacon school, that would come to Kelly and maybe of a day take a look around. Are we using the compass to prompt us to better behavior when we're making decisions about kids or working through discipline issues? Are we using the agreements and the conditions? Is it omnipresent in our school that we want to create a school that's warm and welcoming, for all students? And the basis then, on the basis of the findings of, maybe this, not like a SWAT team or something, but anyway, then, you're going to be prompted different behavior. But I do think that there are certain benchmarks that the people in the district now that have worked on this for at least 5 years can recognize that there are some schools that are farther along. But it behooves us as a system that not only do we recognize the people that are making great gains, but we lift up the schools and the organizations that aren't. And I think we need to move pretty fast. At Kelly, we have a very diverse community. I love working at Kelly because we have so many different languages and backgrounds, represented in our school. But we also have a high level of poverty, and we have to accept that a less than perfect childhood is not going to predict a less than perfect future. And if we can't buy into that concept, then you need to find something else to do, because it is so urgent that that we do this work the right way. So that would be my wish.
And to piggyback on that, I would say, beefing up your office, your and Kaylani's work in office, because I'm going to be utilizing Jody and Paula pretty heavily next year when I'm, rolling this out to parents and stuff. And I just don't know if they're going to be, we need more. Yeah. We need more so that you guys can continue doing the good work that you're doing. So that would be my wish, is that office gets beefed up some more.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective too, I get very, very concerned in our trainings when we do talk how how white Portland is, how white Portland Public Schools is, and we work hard to recruit people of color to come and work here. But let's face it, there are a lot of people of color who don't want to move to Portland, Oregon, for a lot of good reasons, I would venture to say. And so the concern I have is how can we really infuse within those schools, such as mine and others that are primarily white, that sense of not only urgency, it feels like there needs to be a stronger word than that, of criticalness, of, that this is not an option, whether or not we're going to go this direction. This is where we're going. But how do we move together, or how do we help each other move forward with the degree of work that I think we have to do with Condition 6, which is examining the presence and role of whiteness? Because I truly do believe that on an intellectual level, perhaps that's an easy concept, but on an emotional level for white people, I think that's a very, very scary concept to get their arms around. And so I think having support for that and maybe teaming together for support for that. And I would echo having coaches, and I know there are some beacon schools that are kind of leading the way who do have coaches. I heard those coaches are going away. So maybe teaming a beacon school. Jackson Middle School is our feeder middle school, and they're a beacon school. And I think we could learn a lot from Jackson and a lot from what the work they've done or are doing there, and maybe blending some of our partners together so that we can learn from each other and broaden that scope of experience.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pam.
For me, the support, what I would wish is to see a deeper, I think we've begun to integrate and really infuse, courageous conversations about race. But now we need to see the product of the conversations. So in all of our practices from every department, we need to be able to have people who are culturally competent, who get it, who can see it, whether it's through the hiring. Last year we got to go through a wonderful experience. There was a team of principals that actually interviewed teachers of color. There were going to be 8 letters of intent that were finally given. We interviewed over 30 teachers of color, and it was an awesome opportunity. And I was able to stand up and say in a leadership meeting, don't overlook these candidates because they're of color and you think you're in a white school. I said a little better than that, but take a look at them, call them in, interview them. There were some terrific candidates, and we want the best. And quite frankly, I don't care what color it is. I want someone who's going to love my children, who's going to serve my community, who's going to value each child every day that walks through that door, because they deserve that. And so for me, I'm looking at not only in my school, seeing that we continue to have a level of support that will really move the work forward. We know we're in a time of dwindling resources, but this is an area that we cannot cut. We actually need to be moving resources to this area so that we can get where we need to get much more quickly, because my fear is that, kids are being left behind every day. Every day it takes us to get there, somebody is falling behind, and that's unacceptable. So in my own building, I want to see us move the work. I want to see us really learn how to re-engage kids and that have been disengaged from education for whatever reason. And then I want to stop the practices that disengage kids and keep them from the time. I look at my kindergartners, they come in, they're happy, they're learning to read and write, and all of a sudden around 2nd, 3rd grade, you start saying what, and by 5th grade, you're like, oh my goodness, and they've only been here. Nobody to blame but us. We can't blame somebody else. And then at the district level, I want to see all the work pay off. So when I'm talking to people and I'm advocating for my school, that people can understand why it's important that we have certain supports and things. I don't want to know that somebody said this to me, and really I'd never heard it, and this is only in the last few months, and they said, well, there's PPS and there's PPPS. And I was like, what is that? And they said, privileged Portland Public Schools. We can no longer afford to have 2 school districts. We are one, and we need to act as one. So for me, when I see that we are one, and I don't have to worry about your child with special needs getting some services over at this school that my child over here is told aren't available because there's not a parent knocking on the door or knocking down the door. When I see that we are hiring the best regardless. When I see that my colleagues are willing to interview and don't say, well, I don't need diversity here because you know, I don't have diversity. Well, how do our children learn about diversity if you don't have diversity in your school? They need that. They deserve that. They live in a broader world than just white Portland. And I'm a product of Portland. I'm a native of Portland. Portland is my home, so I'd move here, but because I moved away and came back. But by the same token, I get why people don't. A lot of people who come don't stay. Because we need to really do a better job, and they've actually never seen a place quite like this. But in all that, I still love Portland, and I know we can do this. I absolutely know and believe that we can do this. And I look forward to a time, my children have come and gone, but I have a granddaughter coming up, and she's almost 3 years old. And in just a year or two, she's going to be coming, knocking on one of the Portland Public Schools doors. Just call me, because I know you'll have to. But I plan to retire then and go to school with her. But I want her to be able to walk in any school. I do not want to have to handpick her schools, but I will. And we shouldn't have to do that because there are parents that can't. You know, we talk about parents who will rent an apartment somewhere so they can have the address. But the community I serve, the address they have is the one they got. And those are the children they send, and they should never have to worry about coming to a less inferior school. And so that's what I want to see.
All right, thank you.
And I want to be a part of making it happen.
Absolutely.
I'm willing to do the work.
Thank you. Well, there you go. So let's take the next few minutes, and if you have some questions that you'd like to, pose to our panel, and we'll talk about what you're asking. Yes, would you?
I don't have a question, but a comment for what Tamila had. I'm going to piggyback off of what she's saying as a native. I'm a native too, but I've never left. All that you're talking about, I hope that you can walk the talk, because I went through that. My children, I have nephews, I got grandkids, I got a great-grandson. And it starts here. And Pam, I want to correct you. It's not that people don't want to come to Portland. This is a very hostile place. People come in with credentials, qualified. But because of the establishment, the system, it's white people. You got to battle that. I just came out of Portland State a couple years ago. I spent 7 years at Portland State. It is very hostile in academia. I didn't spend all that time in there pursuing what I went in for. I had to step out of my role as a student to help keep the young people from falling through the cracks. It's from one generation after next. But the whole thing, everything that you're talking about, Peggy McIntosh, whatever, my field of study was psychology. I switched over to developmental because it covered the whole spectrum. They're not only killing the kids on the outside, but on the inside. And kids with disabilities, some have it, some don't. But by the time just the fabric, the very fabric that these kids have to deal with, that's enough to blow anybody's mind. So the thing is about the busting. I never believed in the busting, but I had brothers and sisters that were bust. But the changing of the boundaries, I grew up in the Irvington district, but coming from Northwest Portland. But the thing too is that, yes, we don't have time. We don't even have the luxury. I mean, even with my battle scars and all, and my ups and downs, what keep me going is because somebody gonna have to get it right. Asa Hilliard came in here through the Black United Front. There are rules, policies, laws that they never wanted to implement. But Oregon is a training ground. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere in the world. And the thing in a nutshell is that get ready for it, because if you guys are really sincere, yeah, it's about passion and, being compassionate. because I've even gone into the schools to talk with people because I have, you know, nephew, what have you, with a disability or whatever. They consider it a joke. But he's now a senior. He is going to graduate. But the whole thing, you're right, Sharon. They need to hold a lot of these people accountable because we have people that don't even live within. I don't care where you live, but don't come in thinking about, you know, wanting a social status or administrative position where you could care less. After your 5 days, you go home for the weekend in your community. You know nothing about here, the people. A lot of people do get it. They're slow at it. But the thing is that this is real what's happening. But I applaud you, and I applaud the Portland Teachers Program because of Deborah Cochran. But the thing is you're right, these myths and old stereotypes, that was something, I mean, you know, hey, after 60-some years, I was hearing the same thing I heard as a child in academia. But you get it. And Fred, keep doing what you're doing. All it is that, hey, you just entered into a new environment because you're willing to open up your mind and take in, because it's simple about what's going on here. It's not rocket science. We do have a problem.
We have a huge problem, and your voice and other voices, particularly of color, are just so critical to this conversation. And in my parent group, I have black parents who are meeting separately, and they were very transparent with me and said, Fred, can we have the books? We want to do this work on our own. And when we're ready, when we feel comfortable and we feel like we have a unified voice in terms of what our sons and daughters need, then we want to meet with you and then decide, so where do we go from here? And I'm so thankful that they're doing this work on their own, and so we're also meeting as another group of parents, and we have multiple races represented. Mm-hmm. But it's the stories and the counter stories which make it real. I mean, I hear from parents every month what my child experienced in your school today, and it's those stories that empower us to understand the absolute need for change, and also it's the relationships that we're developing with those parents, because it's totally a village, and we all need to put our best work to do things differently.
And nobody's immune from what's going on, because it's going to take everybody. Color really is not the problem, because we're all riding in the same boat.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to tag on to what you said a little bit.
Help yourself.
Okay. Color is not the problem. Race is not the problem, in my opinion. The problem is that we talk about white people and people of color. Now, what's the difference? Our society views everybody in categories. We create these categories of white, and then we say people of color. There are white people, and then there's everybody else. That's one piece that stands out to me. But when we do this people of color and lump all the folks together that way, we let that morph into stereotypes. And when we think in terms of stereotypes. We often talk about how the inner city kids aren't learning well. But we talk about the achievement gap between whites and others. And we talk as if everybody on the other side are not learning. That's not true. There are a whole bunch of people with brown skin, black skin, if you will, yellow. They're learning quite well. There are a lot of those individuals now who will be professional in a few years, and who came through and are professionals now. So we've got to watch what we do and how we categorize and how we keep throwing these things around. That's a part of our media problem. That's a part of the way we talk about one another. And that's part of the way we strategize to solve the problem. We need to think about what our language says, about how we think. And so the problem might not be what we're doing, but the problem may have to do with changing the way we think. And see, I was in the schools for about 35, almost 40 years. And I believe that the teachers and the people in there are good people. They worked hard. I mean, there were some jerks. But for the most part, I don't think they were walking around saying, we don't care. And I don't think they went home thinking that. But what they went home with are those definitions and those stereotypes and those labels that were on those kids. And they came back and they thought about them that way and they treated them that way.
And I would support, and I think the work that our administrators have talked about today are exactly, it's about exactly what you're talking about. It's about getting at those stereotypes. It's about getting at those ways of thinking, those assumptions that we make about children and families based on one criteria. And that criteria is skin color. And so the work that the administrators are doing in our schools, this group and across our district and within our central office as well, the work that we're doing is to get at where do those notions come from? Because as Dr. Phil says, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Where those thoughts about our children and our families come from, and then once we identify where that stuff came from, how we got there, then it's now we need to, our eyes are opened, we need to address that. We need to ask ourselves, do our preconceived notions impact the decisions we're making about children in our schools every day and about families, the families of these children? So that's exactly, you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what our panel was talking about, is getting at that, so that every child can be viewed as themselves, not compared to a white child, but as they are. I show up as I am. And I must say, when we look at the administrators of color and the educational folks in this room, we're all people of color who managed to navigate those preconceived notions. That's why we're here. That's why professional African Americans, professional Hispanics, all of the people of color who have been successful by the standard that is set forth in our country have been able to be successful because we navigated it. But many of our children in our schools, many of the children of color in our schools and the families of color that we deal with don't know how to navigate that, or they know how, but they're just not being as successful at navigating it. And so it's our job to make sure that that playing field is level and that every child, regardless of the family, the economics, their racial identity group, their culture, their heritage, regardless of any of those tags that come with them, they have as much right to be successful, to have from an education what they want as anyone else. And that's you got it. That's exactly what we're talking about. Are there any, let's see, you guys are getting restless. Yes, absolutely.
I just want to
add absolutely.
Just a couple of things. One, in the sense that, you know, race in and of itself is a social construct. And so because it's a social construct, it's something that we live with, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and how we go about dealing with people. And when you look at curriculum in and of itself, and I'm going to use data here, but data shows kids who take courses around knowing who they are, so Mexican American courses or African American courses, tend to do better because they're starting to see themselves. So ideally, when our kids of color are going through school, they're being taught a very white, very European history, subject, books that they read. That's what they get, and so they don't get a chance to see themselves. When Asa Hilliard was here, he put together those baseline
essays.
Exactly. Right. That was about helping kids to see themselves in an attempt for them to be able to improve. And as a personal story, I think of my own self Yes, I'm educated. Yes, I made it. But I have a teacher I will never forget, and I still have my binder from my senior year in high school, Mr. Crotty, who was awesome. And I thought about it most recently as I was telling my story about, I still have my binder, he was so fabulous, whatever, and I'm going on my whole little story. But I thought about after I told my story for like the millionth time, why he was so special to me. And the reason why was because all of the literature that we covered, I was in an honors English class, was all multicultural. We read, the letters from Birmingham. We read Alice Walker. We read Zora Neale. We read tons of different books that allowed for me to be able to see myself, which is why I was able to engage, and why to this day I still have my senior year binder, which is pretty ridiculous. But that's the idea of doing this work, is to acknowledge that kids don't have an opportunity to see themselves. Seeing themselves makes a difference in how they perceive themselves and being a part of the larger society that we live in.
I would not argue with that. I just think this is a deeper conversation that we need to be having. And I think we need to dig deeper and more into what you're talking about, what you were talking about, and hopefully what I was talking about.
Carolyn, yes.
Part of what I think you say is true. But for me, as a native Oregonian whose mother went to Portland Public Schools, that's how far back we go. If I had to give the baseline essays to anyone, I'd give them to white people. Because we didn't know we were poor. We were not destitute when we were here. Right. But it wasn't about income. It wasn't about all of those things. It was about white people's expectations and frustration. I went to Abernathy grade school. I didn't go to kindergarten because I could read and write when I got there. That white teacher, I still know her name, did everything she could to destroy me. But it wasn't just the first teacher, it was the first 4 years. Each one of them had such low expectations. You have to have some place to hang in your head to get rid of the stereotypes that people with dark skin can't learn. And that's what's really, really important. If you're a native of Oregon and you're white, then you don't have the information you need to know about the world. And if you've traveled at all, people in Saudi Arabia and other places are very confused when they come here and they go, but she's white. No, she's black. She's my granddaughter. But he's black. No, you see, it is a construct. But whatever is negative goes to the bottom, goes over here to black people. Black people are constantly on the scale of humanity trying to get from -10 to 10 on the scale, and every time they get there, somebody says, well, there's this book, or there's, what I'm saying?
That's gotta be nice.
I'm saying 10, but when I'm saying 10, I need to make it clear. 10% human, not 100%. 100% is white and male and advantage. I'm saying we hardly get on the scale of humanity, and we get bumped off. So white people need to know this information. If I had to give baseline essays, especially the African American ones, but all the others too, I would give them to white people and say, read them. And it's not about pulling you down and pulling us up. It's about knowing you fit in the circle of humanity like everybody else. You don't get to invite us in. And even our curriculum, the anti-bias curriculum, was about white people. You have a disability, you can come in. You're brown and you can come in. The circle was controlled by white people. The circle, there's one circle of humanity. Everybody's in there, and white people who don't understand need to get over it. People always say, you're so smart. You're so smart. You don't know whether I'm smart or not because you've never met smart black people. And some of them have very nappy hair and they're kind of funky. I had a guy that used to come here and work, and he was like Bill Gates. He was known around the world. But he was smarter than anybody in this building and smarter than most of the people in the world. So it's not about how you smell, how tall you are, where you come from. And if you've met people that come from other places, like Nigerians, if you read some of the literature on them and look at the things they're able to do, my son-in-law, well, we memorized the dictionary by the time we were 15. He can't write a letter in English because he always uses the 9th definition of a word. He knows that many words, but I said, you got to use the first or the second. We don't learn the others.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else with a question or comment or, yes?
I actually wanted to know, as far as the equity teams and stuff, is this being implemented throughout all the schools in the district at this point?
Yes.
Okay, so
that is the expectation.
okay, so do you guys have a list of the schools and how far they're supposed to be and stuff?
Well,
because I'm only seeing a couple of schools that's represented from in this area here.
Well,
and I'm not seeing some of the principals that need to be up there.
Let me explain. When I was the person who selected the panelists, and I tried to get, you heard the panelists mention Strand 1 and Strand 2 and Beacon. And those are the three large categories. The majority of our schools are in Strand 1. And those are schools that are just beginning to have, they had the first three of their seminars this year. And by mid-year, they put together their equity team. So they will continue the training next year. Our Strand 2 principals and schools had some training last year. They were in the seminars last year. They created their equity team, and then this year they were to start working with their equity team. And then the Beacon schools are the schools that have been involved the longest, excuse me, and have done the most work with their equity team. Now, the equity team piece is very important because what we know is that if you have an administrator that has some training in the use of the Courageous Conversations protocols that you've heard our panelists talk about, and that's the agreements, the conditions, and the compass, if they have some level of understanding and training and comfort with the use of those tools, and then they create their equity team, and the equity team works together to, as one of our panelists said, look at their stuff. And once that team begins to unpack some of their racial history, their racial experiences, their racial beliefs and thoughts, and they begin to understand the need for multiple perspectives, that we need to use the racial lens when we look at things, then as they get to a point with that, then they're ready to move forward with the principal to create professional development for the whole school. So it's a stepped process until we've got some schools that are just beginning working with their staff, other schools that have been working with their staff for a greater length of time. This is just a snapshot of the principals. I just tried to select two from each of those categories, 2 Strand 1s, 2 Strand 2s, and a couple of Beacon schools. And I also tried to spread it out across the K5s, which are the elementaries, the K8s, which are elementaries and middle grades, and the 9-12, to kind of give you some idea of the ways it might look different in the different grade configurations as well as where they are in the training. But if I would say, if you have questions about what's happening in your particular child's building, I would say have a conversation with your principal about that, because your principal should be able to converse with you about exactly where the training is there. Does that help? Did I say anything that made me think, or did I just talk? All right. Okay. Yes.
I heard you mention critical race theory, Fred and Lisa both, I think. To what extent will that, that's great, I'm really happy to hear that in the conversation. To what extent will that be woven in increasingly as you move forward? And is it part of Glenn's? Is it, I'm not really.
For us, for our equity team, is to help go deeper into this work. And so 3 of our E-teams, they've been to the seminars and they have the book, and we started last summer doing it as a book study, and then just seeing how it folds out in everyday dealings with individuals. You know, whiteness is property. Having that counter story has been so critical, even for me as a new principal in my building, and having these conversations, these interracial dialogues that I would otherwise not be able to have. And so the goal for our staff is that our equity team, once they have deepened their own personal development, and then they go out and help their colleagues and the staff as well.
What we've done is we started with the 4 agreements, and then we're working into the 6 conditions. Critical race theory is considerably more complex, but at the same time, once you understand it, it supports the conditions so beautifully that I'm actually looking at. I mean, we're introducing them tomorrow, and as we unpack the house we live in, because permanence of racism is so prominent in the film, and critique of liberalism in just incremental change versus interrupting. I mean, we have to interrupt, and so I think the goal is not to overwhelm, because it is overwhelming, but at the same time, I know through my own work, I'm now making the connections fairly easily, and then as an E-team, we're making the connections more easily, and then that translates as we roll it out. But it's such an important lens, because it just puts race absolutely back on the table, and to look at it from such different lenses, we have to understand that.
And it's also used just as part of the framework. So you have courageous conversations, the protocol, you have critical race theory, and then you have systems thinking, which deals with the adaptive and technical change. So it's all part of how you do the work. Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I recently went to the Beyond Diversity training, and just looking at the framework and protocol, and it was reminding me of something, and I couldn't put my finger on it until just sitting here tonight. It really reminds me of work I've done in Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, and it occurred to me that whiteness is an addiction, and what y'all are doing for Portland Public Schools is an intervention. And it may be flawed, or there might be certain things, but you're doing something, and it's important. And I'm really glad to be here and be part of it. So.
There you go.
I was going to say, some of this conversation is very academic, the language that we use around it, and we're trying to translate this conversation for all families. So when we talk about critical race theory, critique of liberalism, I was wondering if there's someone who can interpret for us in simple language, not technical academic speech, around what critical race theory actually is and why it's part of what the district is training staff to understand. Okay. I know Fred and Lisa and even Makari, all of you actually have touched on it. I know that there are 5 tenets of it. Can you just kind of, in layman's terms, speak to what critical race theory is?
I'll start. So counterstory is the first tenet, and counterstory is understanding multiple racial perspectives, meaning it's understanding what you spoke to so eloquently. It's understanding your story and the story of your children and your grandchildren. When I have my meetings, I listen to my parents tell me what happened to their child, in school today, and understanding how the stories were. I have a white perspective. There's a black perspective, and we all have perspectives. And so the counter story is what is above the line, what is obvious to us, and then what is not being said. And I think what's not being said, we have to pay attention to, because otherwise we're not able to get the whole story.
And I'll just tackle whiteness as property, just to give an example. It is the dominant race, the white race, wanting to know or having to know. For example, our families at Irvington, they're predominantly white, and it is what, as a school, as a white person, white privilege, are you going to do for me? And that's a prime example. That's whiteness as property. Always having to either have the last word, or with speech, or wanting to know what, say, someone else is doing. That's my example. Yeah, and the other person who really is versed in this, and I think has a really good grasp, is Kaylani, and I don't know if you wanted to speak on
Paula.
that.
I was thinking about the same thing. I was like, we should call on them.
Critical race theory comes out of the legal system, and simply put, there were things that a whole bunch of people who know a whole bunch of stuff got together. So people from the feminist movement, people that were looking at race, people that were looking at the legal system, they all got together and they noticed some things in common that were playing out racially for differently in the legal system. And so they developed a whole bunch of different ways that people were being treated differently in the legal system. And out of that came a series of what they called tenets. And they were things to pay attention to. And so education looked at what was playing out in education, and they noticed similar things that were happening. And so that's what critical race theory is about. And they noticed that in education, one of the things that Fred talked about were what's known as a counter story. And they noticed that education was portraying one story throughout. And they said, you know what? We need to have, so there's one story, but then there's another story, right? And so that became a counter story. And so it was important that educators look at really the story that they're telling and the story that they're not telling. So that was one of the tenets, and it's called the counter story. There was another thing that they noticed being played out in the legal system, and that was called interest convergence. And what that meant was that there sometimes were benefits given to populations of color in the legal system that only came about if there was a greater benefit to the white population. And so when they looked at it from an educational standpoint, they saw that playing out in education. And we see examples of this when we take perhaps very talented students of color who might benefit a school. And we move them from a situation where they're not getting as good of an education, but they can run fast and jump high. Mm-hmm. And so we move them to a school that has better, say, electives and things like that. Now, we don't let them take the electives, but we move them to that school because they can benefit the school's football team or soccer team or whatever it is. And there's an interest convergence. So we can say, well, we're providing these young people of color a better access to education, when in fact the benefit goes to the school because now they've got a better status on their football team. So that was a second tenet. So there are 5 different tenets that play out both in the legal system and in education. And so that is what they are talking about. There are other ones. There's one called the critique of liberalism, and that is the notion that the legal system is neutral. Everybody gets treated the same. Well, we know that they don't. Well, guess what? Do you hear things in education that say, well, everybody gets the same education, they're all kids, we treat all kids the same? It plays out the same way. And so the critique of liberalism is just that. We need to take a look at it. And is that true in our legal system? Well, we know it's not. Now we have it in the education system, and they're saying, we need to take a look at all these comments where you're saying, well, every kid, we love every kid the same, they all get the same thing. Is that true? So we're going through the critique of liberalism in education now and trying to see, is it playing out the same? They talked about discipline. Is discipline playing out really the same? Are we really neutral? Are the rules that we set up for kids being meted out the same? And so the critique of liberalism in terms of being a critical race theory tenet for education lets us start really having those conversations. And Lisa talked about one of the teachers who didn't even realize that she looked at 2 kids racially differently. And the critique of liberalism lets those teachers do that and have honest conversations. And then there's 2 other ones. Somebody help me out. The permanence of racism. And that is that for every gain that we make, there's something else pushing right up behind it to take it away, right? And so we know that as our civil rights laws push forward, there's other laws just coming right up after it that snatch away those very rights that people get. And that's what happens in education too. So we have these policies, practices, and procedures in education that we put forward with the best of intentions, but we have a system that has been in place forever that starts to bear down and literally erase the gains. And so that's one of the other tenets, and then there's one more. Whiteness is property. Whiteness is property plays out in our legal system by if you've got the money to hire a really great lawyer, the chance is that you're going to get off, right? Mm-hmm. Well, whiteness is property in education plays out in if you have a really strong voice and you get to be one of those people that get listened to in meetings like this, then you usually get what you want for your kids. Mm-hmm. If you belong to a population that doesn't know the rules of how to show up for these kind of meetings, then decisions get made for you. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that education then becomes almost a thing of property, and who gets to own those educational pieces and who doesn't. And so as we start to look at that tenet of critical race theory, we get to start looking at all the pieces that get owned. And when you start looking at the kids that are occupying the seats in things like AP classes, IB classes, mm-hmm. there's an ownership there racially. Mm-hmm. And when you start to look at those kids that are in our remedial courses, there's a racial component to that. So as we look at the schools that have, say, 3 foreign languages and the schools that have 0 languages offered, that means that the school over here with the 3 languages own that property of education that the other schools don't. Mm-hmm. So critical race theory plays out in education in that way that now we get to look and we get to make all these things that in the past have been invisible to a lot of us, visible. And now we get to have that conversation and we get to do it in a framework and a structure that makes sense. And we get to name it for what it is, and then we can address it and change it and have a different outcome. So that's what critical race theory is.
And then Carolyn, I'll give you the last word.
Said about the voice and the whiteness as property. This book is called The Skin That We Speak. It's the thoughts on language and culture in the classroom. I haven't read the whole thing, but it basically gives counter stories, and not just from, there's a counter story from Trinidad, different places, and I'm just going to read the part. It says, a powerful and sophisticated reminder that words can indeed do as much damage as sticks and stones. The Skin That We Speak takes the discussion of language in the classroom beyond the highly charged war of idioms, in which English only really means standard English only, and today's teachers and parents with a thoughtful exploration of the varieties of English we speak and the layers of politics, power, and identity that those forms carry. And the reason I connect with this is that, I came here when I was 10 years old, and I didn't speak really well English, and so I'm pretty sure, I don't remember if I had an accent or not. I probably still do, but anyway, I noticed that the more I present myself with my accent, in more of a standard accent, I have more opportunities, and I noticed that from other people's experience, people with accent are looked differently, and for example, and it's not just white people looking at it differently. Even and I know some kids of different colors. There's a teacher who has a heavy accent, and he's very good in math. He has a different style of teaching, but the kids didn't really have patience with him because he had a different accent. And so I don't know. It's just very interesting.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to give you the last word.
When we talk about systems takes it off of people. Portland Public School is a system of people. And so I'm saying people, we have to change. I won't allow us to use words like system. Critical race theory, Derek Bell wrote a book about it years ago. Now I just found out he was dead. I didn't know he was dead. But it's not that we don't know. It's even with critical race theory, the tenets have been there for a long time. And the last thing I'll say is the Black United Front in 1979 boycotted and did all these things. This is a repeat. This is a repeat. So I'm not going to say we didn't know. I'm not going to say, the system did it. People in Portland, Oregon in 1979 didn't do a whole lot. Now I'll tell you what happened. the movement got co-opted. Because when the Black United Front was doing all of these things and protesting and all of that stuff, people were overwhelmed and they were running around trying to do stuff. They didn't have a change of heart. They were doing enough to shut us up. But what happened is we gained control again. And the way we gained control, we used to have something that sits over there that says if you don't stop and do what we want immediately, then you can be arrested. We have and I'm not saying we shouldn't have a 3-minute rule, but we have a 3-minute rule that when people are talking and people are passionate, you shut up. And you can even get chest bumped if somebody gets irritated. So we now have a control mechanism that's all legalistic. If you stand up, if you come in here with a placard, you can be arrested. And I really saw it when it wasn't about blacks, it was about a teacher who was being dismissed who was an Arab. And the people came in, they had signs sitting down like this. It was the first time I saw 2 police over here and 2 police over here. So we're very conscious about how to control this argument. And it's going to take every one of us to break it down. Don't think it hasn't been done before. It's been done.
Right.
Everything we need to know about educating children, we know. And so I say to all of us, we must have the will to educate every single child. And if you think of that child as your own, you would never give up. If your child is deaf, if your child has no motor skills, you would never give up. So don't give up on these kids in Portland, Oregon, irrespective of how wealthy they are. And we can even trash our wealthy white people. They're feeling some hurt, not the way we're feeling maybe, but they've got gifted kids that are practically suicidal because they can't get an education.